Small insects experience time in slow motion. Dr. Yang explained to me, our perception of time is governed by the speed at which our mind and body process sensory information. In essence, a swifter nervous system allows for slower passage of time and vice versa. The housefly, for example, it experiences time at roughly 20% of the rate at which we do. I stood next to Dr. Wang as the nurse administered IV for my sister, her mouth agape, drool running down her chin. Anaformin B is a formula in development which aims to replicate this phenomenon in humans. He continued, we believe that this will allow the brain to thoroughly process sensory data, rather than unscrambling some of it and making up the rest. Tests in small animals have shown drastically improved cognitive capability, most notably in their reaction time and fine motor skills. I watched how crudely the nurses handled my sister as they cleaned her. Wai was a prospect of the national table tennis team, poised to eventually represent our country in the Olympics. Seeing her reduced to a shell of her former self, while I myself was healthy and whole, it made me feel helpless. One day, Wai had suddenly collapsed during the middle of practice. Dr. Yang from Sina Biotech, who oversaw the medical needs of the team, informed me that an aggressive tumor had developed in her brain. He said that they had to perform an emergency operation in order to save her life, but at the cost of damaging a section of her cerebral cortex. Dr. Yang paused for a moment when he noticed that my attention was fixated on my sister. You can imagine how this treatment, should it prove effective in humans, would greatly benefit patients with impaired brain functions. 9 years ago, when we were both just 12, Wai was recruited at a regional tournament by a scout of the national team. This was tremendous news to her parents, who were farmers and had always wished for a boy but instead got 2 daughters. After some back and forth about compensation, our family agreed to let the state's athletic committee take custody of her. Because of my potential and special bond with my sister, I was also sold off, to live in the city and placed into the same school as my sister. We were twins after all, no matter the fact that she was deemed more talented than me. I will do it, I declared. I will volunteer for the clinical trial. Dr. Yang applauded my courage and reassured me that the medical team would do everything in their power to heal my sister. After some tests to determine whether I was fit to undergo the trial, I signed a waiver releasing Sina Biotech of any legal responsibility in the event that the trials result in any harm up to and including my death. This was merely a formality, however, because Sina Biotech was a state-owned enterprise. I knew the risks and I understood the chances, but if there is even a 1 in 10,000 chance that this treatment could bring back my sister, I had to give it a shot. For just this one time, I wouldn't have to be the worthless one. 2 days later, on the first day of the trial, I was instructed to take 3 capsules along with a small packet of a flavorless blue liquid. This was the lowest dosage that would have any measurable effect on an adult human being, said the technician, who eventually introduced himself as Lee. 10, 20, and 30 minutes passed more or less uneventfully. How do you feel now? Lee had asked for the 7th time. Normal, I answered, for the 7th time. Very well, that will be all for today. That's it? For today. And that concluded the first day of the clinical trial. I remembered having all kinds of doubt going through my mind. What is this drug even supposed to do? How is this going to help my sister? Am I being taken advantage of? As consideration for signing the waiver, I was awarded 8,000 RMB. From what I gathered, taking the money meant that I'd obligated myself to carry out my duty as the test subject of the trials. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, I returned to the facility every Thursday to visit my sister and allowed them to perform more tests on me, upping the dosage marginally during each subsequent trial. Finally, on my way home from the 5th trial, I got my first taste of the housefly effect. It was so brief and so sudden that I almost brushed it off as a figment of my own imagination. It happened while I was riding the metro during the rush hour mania. All around me, frenzied commuters suddenly slowed down to a snail's pace. When the station announcer's voice came on the speakers, I noticed that it was deeper than usual, but only for several seconds. When the doors shut and the train was moving again, everything returned to normal. At the following test, I relayed to the researchers my experience on the metro, and so they asked me to remain at the facility overnight for monitoring in case there was another delayed reaction. I agreed, only this time there was no delay. For this test, the dosage was up to 6 capsules and a small bottle of the blue fluid. Almost immediately upon ingesting the fluid, my body began to panic. By the time I gave Lee the signal that I was under the effect of the drugs, I could no longer communicate verbally with him. His words were eerily distorted, and I couldn't get mine to come out right. Because my heart rate was racing out of control, he sat down and he gestured for me to remain calm. It was just as Dr. Yang had described it. When my perception of time slowed down, my mind was able to process more information with more clarity. My focus sharpened and my peripheral vision expanded. I could read the characters from a notice on the wall without looking directly at it. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of the monitors, the footsteps down the hallways, the friction of the sliding doors, all at the same time. I could feel the hair standing on my skin. It was a strange sensation, yet marvelous at the same time. Several minutes later, when my body had adjusted to my accelerated nervous system, some simple tests were conducted to determine how much my biological flicker rate had increased. Because I had trouble hearing their distorted voices, we communicated by typing on a tablet. The first experiment was fairly straightforward. I sang the national anthem without music, and I clapped to its beat. Compared to the original tempo of the song, I was performing at 196% speed. I never got to listen to the recording, but to my own ears, it sounded like an unintelligible alien language, almost like the ramblings of a deaf mute attempting to speak. Then I was shown some videos on the tablet. People eating, people crossing the road, people doing their laundry, and asked to adjust the playback speed until the video appeared to be moving at a natural pace. Again, it indicated that my personal rate of time had approximately halved. Before we got to do more tests, however, my sense of time gradually began to normalize. My speech returned, my heart rate decelerated, and my eyes were no longer bloodshot. Shortly after, the fine details of my vision began to fade away. The printing on the notice on the wall reverted to a blur. My focus narrowed, and all the vivid objects outside of my focus were dull again. I remember sitting in that lab with a peculiar thought. I want more. During the following days, I remained at the facility and was allowed to stay in the same room as YY. I had a strange dream one night, where the two of us were kids again. We were playing ping pong in that little courtyard back in our village. The ball went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for what seemed like an eternity. I woke up in the middle of that dream, looked over to my sister, and found her staring at me from her side of the room. Why? I sat up and I shuffled towards her side. No response, just her absent gaze again. I tried going back to sleep, but it was difficult to do so, knowing that she was still staring at me. In the end, we spent that night looking at each other. After a week of testing the drug on a daily basis, I was given an increased dosage of the formula for yet another experiment. Only this time, I was instructed to wait 3 hours before ingesting the blue liquid. During these 3 hours, they took from me a blood sample, a saliva sample, and a urine sample. I was taken up to another floor of the building, and on that floor there were some rooms full of exercise equipment. Nothing out of the ordinary, considering these were researchers and doctors working with national-level athletes. But the room that I was brought to my surprise, had a ping pong table. You want me to play table tennis while on the drug? Lee simply nodded and gestured for the opponent to enter the room. Unlike everybody else who wore white lab coats or nurses' uniforms, she was wearing a red and yellow tracksuit. We need to record a couple of matches before you take the liquid, he said, for reference. The first set was over as soon as it began. I was barely able to return her services, let alone score a point or keep a rally going. The second set was hardly better, though I managed to score a point when she hit the ball into her side of the net. The gap in our skill level was far too wide. Even with the drug, I would be no match for her. I thought to myself. I was wrong. After taking the liquid component of the formula, I managed to score 5 points against her in our third set. As the sets went on, I moved faster and faster, my joints and muscles eventually catching up with the speed of my nervous system. I could see the angle of her paddle, and I read the trajectory of the ball as it gently sliced through the air. It reminded me of playing the first levels of Tetris. By the sixth set, I was overwhelming my opponent. I kept going and going until it was she who could not sustain a rally. And then it happened. I felt something snap. Not physically, but I knew something had gone wrong in my head. I put down the paddle and I uttered some nonsense to Lee, who could tell me that I was in distress. The effect of the drug was rapidly wearing off. My sense of time was accelerating, and eventually their jumbled voices became clear again. But it didn't stop there. It kept speeding up. My surrounding was like a videotape on fast forward. Lee was trying to speak to me, but at this point his face had become nothing but a vibrating blur. Anything that moved eventually became shaky lines and figures. And still, it kept speeding up. I could no longer hear anything but a constant, high-pitched ringing. My world was speeding past me so fast it felt as though I was falling into a bottomless pit. From time to time, I could feel my body going to sleep, but my mind could no longer tell whether I was asleep or awake. At some point in that dreamlike state, I saw a clear image of my sister sitting in a wheelchair across from me. She was the only one that I could see because she was perfectly still. Her lips kept repeating the same words. "Make it stop." It was then and there I finally understood what really happened to my sister. To us. And then as spontaneously as she had appeared, Wai disappeared. "Make it stop. Make it stop. Make it stop." I was screaming in my head. "Make it stop." Those were the only words I could think of, and so I kept repeating it over and over until finally, after what felt like hours, I found myself in Dr. Yang's laboratory. I was hooked up to an IV and some monitoring equipment, much like how my sister was when I used to visit her. The ringing in my ears had stopped at last, and I could hear the nurse behind me utter something to Dr. Yang. He spread open my eyelid and pointed a small flashlight directly into my eye. When I flinched, I saw that he was startled. I looked around and I noticed that everybody else had that same startled expression on their faces. As I tried to speak, I realized that my lips were nearly sewn shut by dried saliva. When I raised my hands to touch my mouth, I realized how frail my arm had become. I could hardly muster the strength to sit up from the wheelchair. Somehow 5 months had lapsed since the experiment with the game of table tennis. I was informed that Anaformin B had since been ruled unfit for testing on humans, and furthermore, Cena Biotech offered a sizable sum to buy my silence of my experience. Although they denied having performed any experiments on my sister, she were to remain in their care. She was relocated to another facility, and I was no longer allowed to visit. I fear that she will forever be imprisoned in that timeless world. Clearly, as you are reading about this now, I have turned down their offer. I tried posting my story to a number of platforms here in China, all of which were swiftly removed. And so I turn to you, with the hope that this will reach the eyes and ears of the international community. A personal thank you to anyone who can translate my story. Originally written in simplified Chinese by user Juju YY on a forum based in Taiwan. Dated September 2nd, 2014.